Mordecai, or Max Gorelik, was the translator of the Firebugs. He lived from 1899 to 1990. He was also a prominent scenic designer, and most of the images in this video are renderings of his provided by Southern Illinois University of Carbondale, where he actually used to work. Gorelik was originally born in Russia, but immigrated to the United States at a very young age, probably around 5 or 6. He was Jewish. In his life, he was a theatrical and film designer, playwright, historian, teacher, scholar, director, critic, theorist, and, of course, translator. As a quick side note, most of this information comes from Anne Fletcher's biography, Rediscovering Mordecai Gorelik. Gorelik's view of theater was that of a manifestation of the time's culture and a vehicle for social change. As a young man, he got the chance to tour Europe in the early 1920s on a Guggenheim Fellowship. He was interested in learning about German Expressionism. In the 1920s, he employed emerging avant-garde styles such as Expressionism, Constructivism, and his personal favorite, Theatricalism. At this time, he began to actively reject realistic interpretations of the theater, though when, interestingly enough, the absurdist movement came about in the 1950s, he wasn't really a fan of the style. In the 1930s, Gorelik was a prominent scenic designer that worked for many companies, but definitely most famously and most consistently, he worked for group theater, which, if you may remember from theater history, was a New York City theater collective formed in 1931 by Harold Clurman in collaboration with Cheryl Crawford and Lee Strasberg. It was intended as a base for the kind of theater they and their colleagues believed in, a forceful, naturalistic, and highly disciplined artistry. It was very left-wing and included a lot of famous names. As a designer, Gorelik was the apprentice of Robert Edmond Jones, who famously wrote The Dramatic Imagination, which is still very widely read today. Gorelik was intensely inspired by Brecht ever since he first met him in 1935, and he also knew Erwin Piscator. He contributed to the assimilation of European influence on the American stage. He enjoyed mixing dramatic forms. He was a pioneer of scenic design. He helped define the designer's role in the production process and employed metaphor in his design. He advocated for the script to be the primary focus of the production process, which is not surprising as he was also a passionate playwright. Though he designed for many prominent playwrights, the plays he designed were, for the most part, ultimately unsuccessful, with exceptions such as All My Sons by Arthur Miller, which is the rendering being featured here. He also designed far less Broadway productions compared to other popular designers of his time, which was about 20. He designed about 20 Broadway shows. He had a style that was considered harsher and less appealing than most. Not to mention, some considered him a little difficult to work with. He also received flack for being a designer that expanded beyond his function into theatrical theory. Like his colleagues in group theater, he was a very prominent leftist. He often included Marxist concepts in his designs. Of course, he was able to read Karl Marx in the original German, just as a little tidbit. However, he believed that communism was not possible within the structure of the United States. He described Marxism as an economic and historic theory, not a political party. Uh, this These beliefs of his sometimes did affect his ability to find employment. And despite these views, Gorelik did not consider himself a communist and was not questioned by the Un-American Activities Committee. In the 1940s, Gorelik moved to Hollywood and started working on film. He totally hated it and considered the process too formulaic. And then around this time, he was he was always kind of jumping from theater companies, and now he had universities in the mix. And in 1940, he wrote the highly regarded theater history book called New Theaters for Old. He finally settled in when he accepted a position at the previously mentioned Southern Illinois University. This was in the 1960s. He wrote his translation of the Firebugs in 1964, and he was also the first director of the production, which received highly positive reviews. Even after his retirement from Southern Illinois University, he continued his career as a teacher, theorist, and practicing artist. To me, what was interesting about reading Gorelik's impression of Frisch that he has in his script is that he seemed to admire him for some of the same reasons that he tried to admire himself. Notably, Frisch's experimentation and his lack of fame. But that is just an idea, and I hope this video was helpful. Have a good one.